So this is the Igcse extra bit for the mass media. Yeah. So mass media stuff is all the same stuff as GCSE, with a few extra things that we're going to cover now. What can come up? Well, patterns of media use, e.g. class, gender, age and ethnicity. What this means is different groups in our culture, they use the mass media in different ways. Best example I can think of, this is a program called Antiques Roadshow. None of you lot have watched it. Who watches Antiques Roadshow? Older, middle class people. Yeah. X Factor, who watches that? More working class, more younger people. BBC 4 is a channel most you never watched. It's for middle class people. You watch BBC 3. So depending on these things, you use the mass media in different ways. Moving on. Freedom and censorship. Now in our country we say we have a free press, and we do mostly, but it's not to say the press is completely free. We do have what's called D notices or DA notices. The government, the establishment, can suppress things. They can say, you can't print this. The government can say, here's a D notice, and the media are not allowed to use this at all. And it's called a D notice. So we do have some censorship in this country. Moving on. There might be something on what's called the stratification of forms of cultural expression. Very complicated phrase, but it simply means, again, there's different types of media for different people. Another way to think about it is high versus mass or popular culture. A lot of what you watch is what we would call popular culture. The Sun is popular or mass culture. X Factor, Britain's Got Talent. This is popular or mass culture. It's designed for lots of people, and it's designed for people. So for instance, The Sun, in case you don't know, The Sun is designed for people with a reading age of 8. There are no words in The Sun the average 8-year-old wouldn't understand. It's what's called mass or popular culture. It's designed for pure entertainment. You also have high culture. This guy here is called George Steiner. He used to make documentaries in the 50s and 60s. It's what's called an intellectual. He made documentaries for the telly on BBC 4 and the like about art, about high culture. The Guardian, the Times, the Telegraph, newspapers, they're examples of high culture. They're not for very many people. They're designed for people with a high education, university and the like, people with the upper middle class. That's a stratification of forms of cultural expression. Yeah. Do you go to an art gallery? Yeah. Or do you go to the pub? And then there's something we call neoliberal bias. We've mentioned before, in different parts of the mass media in Britain, especially in newspapers, you have people like Murdoch who own them, and they use their power over their newspaper to decide what sort of things they report. If you're a neoliberal, you believe in small government, low taxation, and for rich people to be free to do whatever they want. So in newspapers that Murdoch runs, they tend to be very, very anti-trade unions, always criticising them. Look at these headlines here. So these are newspapers that Murdoch owns that are against trade unions. And yet the same newspapers on page 28 run behind a little bit about big companies and the way they treat their workers. And that's what we call neoliberal bias. He uses his power to have big front page stories against the working class, against unions, and anything that's done against, anything big business that's wrong gets hidden on page 28 in a little tiny column. Right, last bit. Do a little bit more on the effects of the mass media on audiences. Now, We've mentioned before the hypodermic syringe theory. The simple idea is something appears in the mass media, people believe it, they follow it. Done. Yeah? So someone says, we should burn black people, let's burn black people. This is what's called a simplistic idea that people don't really follow anymore. Then we have the two-step flow theory. In the two-step flow theory, the media pushes out a simple story, and that affects important people. That affects people who have influence, and they then influence everybody else. Two steps. So the media influences, let's say, the head of a family or a teacher in school, and those people use their influence to influence everybody else. I heard on the news that this happens. Yeah, that's called the two-step flow theory. Then there's the uses and gratification model. It's got to be like this. People might look at a picture of this woman on telly, and a woman might say, they're nice jeans. And a bloke would think, I'd like to sleep with her. That's the uses and gratifications theory. It's not everyone watches the media and thinks the same thing. They use it for their gratification, it means enjoyment, in the way that suits them. They see the same thing, but think different things about it. They use the media depending on what they want to use it for. That's the uses and gratification theory. And finally, selective filtering or decoding. You've all seen this guy, David Cameron, Ed Miliband. They come on telly, and some people turn the telly off. They filtered it. Or some people already hate him or him, and no matter what they say, they hold it against them. They decode it in their own way. So again, the mass media, the way it affects people is complicated. This is definitely wrong, hypodermic. These are other later, more sophisticated ways to try and explain how the mass media might affect people.